In 2018, the world watched as Donald Trump unleashed a series of tariffs that would reshape global trade dynamics. From steel and aluminum to washing machines and solar panels, these tariffs were not just economic tools, but political statements, signaling a shift in U.S. trade policy. The effects of these tariffs were felt far beyond American borders, sparking trade wars, disrupting supply chains, and forcing countries to rethink their economic strategies. This video delves into the intricacies of Trump's tariffs, exploring their origins, their immediate and long-term effects on global economies, and the lessons learned from this bold experiment in protectionism. Donald Trump's presidency was marked by a distinctive approach to trade policy. Unlike his predecessors, who generally favored free trade agreements and globalization, Trump adopted a protectionist stance, arguing that unfair trade practices had eroded American manufacturing and harmed U.S. workers. His solution? Tariffs. Taxes on imported goods designed to protect domestic industries from foreign competition. In early 2018, Trump announced a series of tariffs on steel and aluminum imports, citing national security concerns under Section 232 of the Trade Expansion Act of 1962. This move was followed by additional tariffs on $250 billion worth of Chinese goods, targeting everything from electronics to agricultural products. The global reaction was swift and fierce, with countries retaliating with their own tariffs and filing complaints with the World Trade Organization, WTO. This script explores the multifaceted impact of Trump's tariffs, examining their effects on the U.S. economy, the global trade landscape, and the geopolitical relationships that underpin international commerce. To understand the impact of Trump's tariffs, it's essential to first examine the rationale behind them. Trump's America First agenda was rooted in the belief that globalization had disproportionately benefited other countries at the expense of the United States. He argued that countries like China had engaged in unfair trade practices such as intellectual property theft, currency manipulation, and state subsidies, which gave their industries an unfair advantage. The tariffs on steel and aluminum were justified on national security grounds. Trump claimed that the decline of these industries had left the U.S. vulnerable in the event of a conflict, as the country would be reliant on foreign suppliers for critical materials. By imposing tariffs, Trump aimed to revive these industries, create jobs, and reduce the U.S. trade deficit. However, critics argued that the tariffs were less about national security and more about protecting politically influential industries. They also pointed out that the tariffs would raise costs for U.S. manufacturers who relied on imported steel and aluminum, and ultimately harm the very workers Trump sought to protect. The tariffs had an immediate impact on the U.S. economy with mixed results. On the one hand, they provided a boost to domestic steel and aluminum producers, who saw increased demand and higher prices for their products. Companies like U.S. Steel and Nucor announced plans to reopen idled plants and hire more workers, fulfilling one of Trump's key promises. On the other hand, the tariffs led to higher costs for industries that relied on steel and aluminum, such as automotive, construction, and appliance manufacturing. Companies like General Motors and Whirlpool reported increased production costs, which they passed on to consumers in the form of higher prices. This, in turn, led to inflationary pressures and reduced consumer spending. The agricultural sector was particularly hard hit, as China retaliated with tariffs on U.S. soybeans, pork, and other agricultural products. Farmers who had already been struggling with low commodity prices saw their exports plummet, leading to bankruptcies and farm closures. In response, the Trump administration rolled out a $12 billion bailout package for farmers. But critics argued that this was a temporary fix that did not address the underlying issues. Trump's tariffs did not go unanswered. Countries affected by the tariffs quickly retaliated, leading to a series of trade wars that disrupted global markets. The European Union, Canada, Mexico, and China were among the most vocal critics, imposing their own tariffs on U.S. goods such as bourbon, motorcycles, and agricultural products. China, in particular, emerged as a key adversary in the trade war. The U.S.-China trade relationship, which had been fraught with tension for years, reached a boiling point as both countries engaged in a tit-for-tat escalation of tariffs. The Chinese government accused the U.S. of protectionism and vowed to defend its interests while also seeking to diversify its trade relationships to reduce its reliance on the U.S. market. The trade war had a chilling effect on global trade, with businesses uncertain about the future of international commerce. Supply chains were disrupted as companies scrambled to find alternative suppliers and markets. The uncertainty also led to a slowdown in global economic growth, with the International Monetary Fund, IMF, warning that the trade war could shave 0.5% off global GDP. While the immediate impact of Trump's tariffs was significant, their long-term effects on global trade are still unfolding. One of the most notable consequences has been the shift in global supply chains. Companies, wary of the uncertainty created by the trade war, began to diversify their supply chains, moving production out of China and into other countries such as Vietnam, India, and Mexico. This trend, known as reshoring or nearshoring, has the potential to reshape global trade patterns in the coming years. Another long-term effect has been the erosion of trust in the multilateral trading system. The WTO, which was established to promote free trade and resolve disputes between countries, found itself sidelined as countries resorted to unilateral measures. The U.S. blocked the appointment of new judges to the WTO's appellate body, effectively crippling its ability to resolve disputes. This has led to calls for reform of the WTO, but progress has been slow, and the future of the organization remains uncertain. The tariffs also had geopolitical implications, particularly in the context of U.S.-China relations. The trade war exacerbated tensions between the two countries, leading to a broader decoupling of their economies. This decoupling has extended beyond trade to include technology, investment, and even education, as both countries seek to reduce their dependence on each other. The long-term consequences of this decoupling are still unclear, but it has the potential to reshape the global economic order. As with any major policy shift, there were winners and losers from Trump's tariffs. In the U.S., the steel and aluminum industries were clear winners, as they benefited from higher prices and increased demand. However, these gains were offset by the losses suffered by other industries, particularly agriculture and manufacturing, which faced higher costs and reduced exports. Globally, the tariffs created both winners and losers. Countries like Vietnam and India benefited from the shift in supply chains, as companies moved production to these countries to avoid U.S. tariffs. However, countries that were heavily reliant on exports to the U.S., such as Canada and Mexico, suffered as their goods became more expensive and less competitive in the U.S. market. China, despite being the primary target of Trump's tariffs, managed to weather the storm better than expected. While the trade war did lead to a slowdown in Chinese economic growth, the Chinese government responded with stimulus measures and efforts to boost domestic consumption. Additionally, China sought to strengthen its trade relationships with other countries, particularly in Asia and Europe, reducing its reliance on the U.S. market. The Trump tariffs serve as a case study in the complexities of trade policy and the unintended consequences of protectionism. While the tariffs achieved some of their intended goals, such as reviving domestic industries and bringing attention to unfair trade practices, they also highlighted the risks of unilateral action in an interconnected global economy. One of the key lessons from the Trump tariffs is the importance of multilateralism in addressing global trade issues. While the WTO has its flaws, it remains the best forum for resolving trade disputes and promoting free trade. The erosion of trust in the WTO and the rise of unilateral measures have created uncertainty and instability in the global trading system, which ultimately harms all countries. Trump's tariffs were a bold protectionist move with global consequences. While they addressed some concerns, they also sparked trade wars and economic disruptions. Moving forward, a balanced trade policy must combine strategic tariffs with investments in education, infrastructure, and innovation. The U.S.-China tensions, globalization, and supply chain vulnerabilities will shape future trade decisions. The key challenge is to protect domestic industries while fostering global trade and economic resilience. Ultimately, cooperation and compromise are essential for a more equitable and sustainable global economy. If you enjoyed this, don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more insights.